May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord. Amen. It's so wonderful to be home. Now, I promise you that I will talk about Abraham and especially Sarah today. I mean, it's such a good story. How could I not preach on it? But I'm going to start by introducing you to a woman named Shoshana Littman, who lives here in Victoria and works with the UVic students up at the Multi-Faith Center. She is the Jewish spiritual care provider. And though she has many talents, her official title is Megiddo. And if this word Megiddo, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, is new to you, don't worry, it was new to me as well. A Megiddo is a Jewish female storyteller. You see, in Judaism, storytelling and the role of storyteller is so important. It's so central to Judaism that they actually ordain their Megiddos. And Shoshana is the first female ordained Megiddo in all of Canada. So when Shoshana tells a story, she gathers a group of people around her. And before beginning her story, she asks, "Are you ready to hear a story?" In her question is an invitation. And in responding yes, the group makes the choice to hear the story with their whole selves, to move beyond the first layer of the story, the facts, into a more intimate hearing where the subtleties, details, meaning, and intimations are welcomed. And it's really cool. We just saw Christine do it. We have this same storytelling in our own Christian tradition of godly play. So in godly play, which is a Montessori-based Christian storytelling practice for children, the storyteller, like Shoshana, gathers all the people. And once they've gotten all their wiggles out, the storyteller asks, "Are you ready to hear a story?" This is an invitation to children and to the rest of us who hear the story to notice, to wonder, to hear the subtleties, details, meanings, and intimations of the story. So I'm going to ask the question today. I wonder how you in your life have been invited to hear stories. Perhaps like me, you were raised hearing stories from your parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, or friends. My mother used to sit at my bedside every night and invite me to listen to stories about her childhood. And these stories created a whole new world for me. They were about this distant place called New Brunswick in this era called the 60s. Can you even imagine? And though her stories did include facts, the places and characters were real, that's not really what mattered. And it's not really what matters to me now as I hear these stories over a glass of wine. And I get to hear those subtleties, those details, those meanings, and those intimations. That's what stories are really about, aren't they? I believe that stories can truly shape us if we let them. If we accept the invitation and allow our hearts and minds to listen to what a story is telling us. When someone dies, we worry about losing their stories, don't we? We can be sad about losing the facts of those stories, but I think what we're really afraid of is that we will forget their meanings, the details, the lessons, the way that person told the story, the parts that they laughed at, and the ones that made them cry. Now, I say all this about stories because today in our Genesis reading, we have quite the story. And this story has been described as an accomplished piece of epic art. But I'm going to argue that at the same time, a story about Abraham and Sarah receiving and hosting a dinner party for 3 random strangers who just happen to be God in some way and bring them this message about having a baby beyond their childbearing years, it's frankly ludicrous, isn't it? It's a ridiculous story. And the storyteller recognizes this. The the storyteller tells us that Sarah laughs. In the face of God, she laughs. If we only listen to the facts of this story, well, it's truly laughable. So for this reason, I must take the page out of any good Jewish storyteller or a proper godly play teacher and ask, are you ready to hear a story? Awesome. Are you ready to move beyond the facts, which our Western society just loves so much, and open your hearts and minds to hear the subtleties, the details, the meaning, and intimations of this story, which is perhaps as old as storytelling itself? Are you ready to hear God speak through the story of Abraham and Sarah? So I'm going to start by introducing you to our storyteller today, who is called Yahwist. Now, really, the Yahwists were probably a group of people who told some of the earliest stories about Israel's history. But for the sake of this story, we're just going to call our storyteller Yahwist. And Yahweh invites us into this story by setting kind of a vivid, almost dreamlike scene. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. You can picture it, can't we? And then we hear the facts of this story. Abraham sees 3 men standing near him. He offers them a feast typical even today of Bedouin spiritual hospitality. Abraham and Sarah live in a very patriarchal culture, so obviously we don't really see Sarah for the first bit of the story. Those are the facts. Yet, suddenly, our storyteller, Yahwist, moves away from the facts and presents us with the most unlikely of scenarios. The 3 men ask, "Where is your wife, Sarah?" What? How unusual. In a society where the most powerful figure are men, the first son, the husbands, the fathers, why are they asking for Sarah, a woman? What is our storyteller Yahwist trying to tell us? Well, in his typical storytelling fashion, which we hear throughout Genesis, this storyteller is saying, watch and listen. The matriarch Sarah is coming to center stage. I mean, this visit was never even about Abraham. It was always about Sarah. It was always about God working with humanity, working within the patriarchal structure, while at the same time raising up and supporting a woman who was excluded by society's institutional structures. Our brilliant storyteller is making the point that God, who has chosen the Israelites as his people, regularly acts counter to human convention and expectations. So picture with me, Sarah here in the center stage, all eyes on her. And what does she do? She laughs. In the most surprising of reactions, the storyteller has created a human. She changes from a character far removed from us in our modern day to a real human. A cynical human, a realistic woman, who cannot believe what she is hearing, but she's so darn human. She even denies that she laughed in God's face. This is so typical of our storyteller Yahwist's way of telling stories throughout Genesis. He loves the anti-hero, a real person who has real human reactions, faults, and qualities. In making Sarah so darn relatable, we are reminded that God never works against people, but always with and for people, despite and because of our beautiful, messy humanity. Sarah laughs because she is stuck, like so many of us are, with an impossible story. She's caught between knowledge and promise. She thinks, here are the facts. This is what I know to be true. Abraham has heard this covenant not once, but twice, yet nothing has happened. I have been waiting for ages, yet nothing has happened. Through Hagar, and again, nothing has happened. Now let's move beyond the facts. Let's listen to this story through God. God comes down to Sarah and says, "You know what, Sarah? I heard you. You did laugh. And you laughed, Sarah, because you are human. You're so intelligent and wise, and you have been hurt by what seems like a promise that will never come true. Yet, Sarah, I am asking you, is anything too hard for the Lord? I'm asking you, Sarah, to believe that I am the greatest storyteller of all times, the author who brought all things into being, who told the story of light coming into this world. And so, Sarah, please laugh. But laugh not with cynicism, but with unbelievable joy. Laugh with that big belly laugh until you cry. Laugh so hard that you feel it deep in your womb where I am growing life and where my promise is being fulfilled. So let me repeat my question. Are you ready to hear a story? This time, however, I want you to imagine Yahwist, the storyteller, asking this question. Are you ready to hear a story? A story where God's story weaves its way through the human story. One where God regularly acts counter to human convention and expectation. One where those that society leaves out, puts down, or quiets are put at the center of the stage. A story where the church laughs, but where this cynical laughter turns to joy. A story that all are invited to hear. A story that we say yes to listening to with our whole hearts and minds. So as Christine mentioned, I am a seminary student. I'll be ordained in September. And so I spend my days with my colleagues online wrestling over what it means to tell the story of our church in the 21st century. How are we as storytellers of the good news called to present the stories of Jesus in an ever more secularized society where many people are walking away for good, valid reasons? They have every right to be angry and to ignore the church. And yet in that, I find excitement, and I laugh. I laugh for joy, because what I have noticed is hope. I see hope around me in my classmates, because for the first time in all of Christian history, the voices that the Yahwist storyteller would have put front and center in his narratives are not only being included, but are actually telling this Christian story. I mean, the books that we as future clergy are reading and listening to and the videos we're watching are filled with stories and voices that have never been central in the Christian story. And so I believe that the story of Jesus, the good news, is slowly and with much effort becoming a story that can be preached by all. In my classroom, I sit beside LGBTQ SAI2+ peoples, Indigenous peoples, people of color, women, and those of all ages. And as I listen to their stories, with all their subtleties, details, meanings, and intimations, I hear the voice of God. And then I turn next to me, and I see Sarah, sitting along with all the witnesses, martyrs, and saints whose names have been erased from the Christian story. And there is Sarah, tears streaming down her face. And oh, how we laugh.